The morning sun cast long shadows across the logistics office as Vivian Reese sorted through requisition forms with the kind of methodical precision that came from years of training most people would never know about. Her fingers moved across the keyboard in steady rhythm, processing supply requests that kept Fort Ashford running smoothly. The tattoo on her left forearm caught the light as she reached for a coffee mug, a geometric pattern of intersecting lines and a small symbol that looked almost tribal in design. 3 desks away, Corporal Jensen nudged Private Wilcox and tilted his head in Vivian's direction. The younger man glanced over and smirked before returning to his own paperwork. Vivian noticed the exchange in her peripheral vision, but kept her focus on the screen in front of her. She had learned long ago that acknowledging every whisper and sideways glance only invited more attention. The office hummed with the usual morning activity. Phones rang intermittently. The copy machine whirred in the corner. Someone laughed at a joke Vivian couldn't hear. She had been working in this building for 8 months now, ever since she had accepted the civilian position managing supply chain logistics for the base. It was quiet work, predictable work, the kind of routine that felt both foreign and necessary after everything that had come before. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe there are military bases in your area where you've seen people prove themselves in unexpected ways. Staff Sergeant Morris walked past her desk, carrying a stack of inventory reports. He paused and set them down beside her keyboard. "Need these processed by 1400, he said. His eyes lingered on her tattoo for a moment before he moved on. Vivian nodded and pulled the reports toward her, scanning the first page with practiced efficiency. The door opened with enough force to draw everyone's attention. Lieutenant Derek Sutherland strode in wearing his dress uniform, boots polished to a mirror shine, brass gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He was 28 years old and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never truly been challenged. 2 junior officers followed, behind him, like satellites orbiting a planet. Sutherland's gaze swept across the office and landed on Vivian. He altered his trajectory, crossing the room with deliberate steps. His companions exchanged knowing looks. "Ms. Reese," Sutherland said, stopping at the edge of her desk. His voice carried across the suddenly quiet office. "I need the equipment manifest for the field exercise next week. Please tell me it's ready." Vivian looked up from her screen and met his eyes with calm professionalism. "It was submitted to your office yesterday morning, Lieutenant. Should be in your email." Sutherland frowned and made a show of checking his phone. His thumb scrolled through messages with exaggerated movements. "Huh," he said. "Must have missed it. You know how it is with all the important correspondence I receive." One of his companions snorted. Vivian returned her attention to the inventory reports without responding. "That's an interesting tattoo," Sutherland continued, leaning slightly against her desk. His tone shifted to something that might have passed for casual interest if not for the edge beneath it. "What's it supposed to be? Tribal art? Some kind of spiritual thing?" Vivian's fingers stilled on the keyboard. She could feel the attention of everyone in the office now, conversations dying away as people tuned in to the exchange. "It's personal," she said simply. "Personal," Sutherland repeated, drawing out the word. He glanced back at his companions. "You hear that? It's personal." He turned back to Vivian. "Most people get tattoos that mean something, though. Family names, significant dates, or they just like the way it looks. Which category are you in?" Vivian saved her work and closed the document she had been editing. She turned her chair to face him directly. "Is there something else you need, Lieutenant? I have those reports to finish." "Just making conversation," Sutherland said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "No harm in getting to know the people we work with, right? Especially when they have such distinctive ink." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Kind of looks military, actually. Were you in the service?" "I work in logistics," Vivian said. "That's all there is to know." The tension in the room thickened. Sutherland studied her face for a long moment, searching for something. Then he straightened and adjusted his uniform jacket. "Right," he said. "Logistics. Well, make sure those reports are accurate. We can't afford any mistakes during the exercise." He turned and walked toward the door, his companions following. As they left, Vivian heard one of them say something too quiet to make out, followed by laughter that echoed down the hallway. She turned back to her desk and picked up where she had left off, but her jaw was set a fraction tighter than before. Across the office, Corporal Jensen was still watching her, his expression uncertain. Vivian ignored him and pulled up the next requisition form, her fingers finding their rhythm again as the office slowly returned to its normal volume. The tattoo on her forearm seemed darker in the afternoon light, the lines sharp and precise. Most people saw it as decoration, something she had gotten on a whim or to mark some personal milestone. They had no idea what those lines represented, no idea what she had done to earn the right to bear that mark. And that was exactly how she needed it to stay. The incident in the logistics office spread through Fort Ashford with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. By lunch, half the base had heard some version of Lieutenant Sutherland questioning the civilian woman with the strange tattoo. By dinner, the story had grown embellishments about her silence, being suspicious, about how she had dodged his questions like someone with something to hide. Vivian sat alone in the commissary the next day, her tray holding a sandwich she wasn't particularly hungry for. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation and the clatter of dishes. Groups of soldiers clustered at tables, their laughter punctuating the ambient noise. She had chosen a corner spot with a clear view of the exits, a habit she couldn't seem to break no matter how many months passed in this quiet civilian life. Lieutenant Sutherland entered with his usual entourage. Today he had gathered 4 others, including Captain Brennan from the motor pool and 2 sergeants Vivian recognized, but didn't know by name. They collected their food and made their way across the cafeteria with the kind of trajectory that suggested intention rather than coincidence. "Mind if we join you?" Sutherland said, already pulling out a chair before Vivian could respond. His companions arranged themselves around the table, effectively boxing her in. The conversational bubble around them quieted as nearby tables tuned in. Vivian set down her sandwich and waited. "We've been talking," Sutherland continued, settling into his seat with exaggerated comfort. "About your tattoo. A couple of the guys here think they've seen something similar before, but none of us can quite place it." He took a bite of his burger and chewed slowly. "You know how it is. Something familiar, but just out of reach. Drives you crazy." Captain Brennan leaned forward, his forearms on the table. "I did 3 tours overseas," he said. "Saw a lot of ink on a lot of people. That pattern on your arm, though, that's not standard military. Not Marine Corps, not Army, definitely not Air Force." One of the sergeants nodded. "Could be Navy," he offered. "Some of the Spec Ops guys have custom designs. SEAL teams, EOD, that kind of thing." Vivian remained silent, her expression neutral. She picked up her water bottle and took a slow drink. "Or maybe it's just a coincidence," Sutherland said, his tone dripping with false consideration. "Maybe Ms. Reese here just has really specific taste in geometric art. Nothing wrong with that." He smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Though I have to say, it does seem like the kind of thing someone might get to look important. You know, stolen valor adjacent." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Vivian felt the eyes of the surrounding tables burning into her. She set down her water bottle with deliberate care and met Sutherland's gaze directly. "I've never claimed to be anything I'm not," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, almost flat. "I do my job. I don't bother anyone. And what's on my arm is my business." Sutherland's smile widened. "See, that's the thing. When someone gets defensive like that, it makes people wonder. If it's just a tattoo, why not just tell us what it means? Unless there's a reason you can't." Before Vivian could respond, the commissary door opened and Captain Helena Frost walked in. She was intelligence branch, mid-30s, with the kind of observant eyes that missed very little. She scanned the cafeteria, noted the scene at Vivian's table, and altered her path to collect her food from a different line that gave her a better viewing angle. Vivian recognized the assessment in Frost's posture. She had worked with intelligence officers before, back when her life had involved classified briefings and mission parameters that didn't officially exist. Frost had the same measure quality, the same way of watching without appearing to watch. "Look," Captain Brennan said, adopting a more reasonable tone. "We're just trying to understand. This is a military base. People here have earned their place through service and sacrifice. When someone shows up with military-style ink but won't explain it, that raises questions. You can see how that might be a problem. One of the sergeants nodded. We had a guy last year who claimed to be former Special Forces. Wore the tab, told all the stories. Turned out he'd washed out of basic. Made fools of everyone who believed him. I haven't claimed anything, Vivian repeated. She began gathering her tray, preparing to leave. Sutherland reached out and tapped the table near her hand. Not quite touching, but close enough to be a territorial gesture. We're not done talking, he said. His voice had lost its false friendliness. You work on this base. You interact with military personnel every day. We have a right to know who we're working with. Vivian stood, tray in hand. She looked down at Sutherland with an expression that might have been patience or might have been something far more dangerous, held under tight control. You have access to my employment records and my background check, Lieutenant. If you have official concerns, take them through official channels. She walked toward the tray return, aware of every eye in the commissary, tracking her movement. Behind her, she heard Sutherland's voice carrying across the space. Notice how she didn't deny it, he said to his companions, loud enough to be overheard by multiple tables. Someone with nothing to hide doesn't act like that. Vivian deposited her tray and headed for the exit. As she passed Captain Frost's table, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Frost's expression was unreadable, but Vivian caught the slight tilt of her head, the way her gaze dropped to Vivian's forearm before returning to her face. It was the look of someone making mental notes, someone who would be doing research before the day was over. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and hot. Vivian walked back toward the logistics building with measured steps, her breathing controlled, her face neutral. But her mind was already running calculations, assessing how much longer she could maintain this quiet civilian existence before her past caught up with the present. The tattoo on her arm seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, a permanent reminder of who she had been, who she still was under the careful camouflage of ordinary life. The base-wide formation assembled on the parade grounds 3 days later for the quarterly award ceremony. Over 800 personnel stood in neat ranks under the late morning sun, dress uniforms crisp and aligned with military precision. General Raymond Blackwell would be presenting commendations and addressing recent operational successes. Attendance was mandatory for all personnel, civilian staff included. Vivian stood near the back of the civilian section, positioned between the commissary manager and 2 contract maintenance workers. She had chosen a professional navy blazer and slacks, her hair pulled back in a simple style. The tattoo on her forearm was visible below her rolled sleeves, the geometric lines stark against her skin. Lieutenant Sutherland had positioned himself with perfect calculation. He stood with his platoon in a section that gave him clear sight lines to the civilian area. Throughout the pre-ceremony wait, Vivian had felt his attention like a physical weight. He had been gathering allies over the past few days, building a narrative that the mysterious civilian with the suspicious tattoo was disrespecting military culture by wearing symbols she hadn't earned. The ceremony began with the national anthem. 800 voices fell silent as the flag rose. Vivian stood at attention with her hand over her heart, her posture unconsciously perfect in a way that would have told a trained observer exactly what kind of training she carried in her muscle memory. General Blackwell took the podium and began his remarks. He was 56 years old with iron gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades making decisions that cost or saved lives. His uniform displayed rows of ribbons that told a story of multiple deployments and commendations most officers would never achieve. As he spoke about unit excellence and the importance of integrity, Vivian listened with the same neutral expression she had maintained for months. The awards portion began. Names were called. Recipients marched forward to receive certificates and medals. Applause rippled through the formation at appropriate moments. The ceremony was proceeding normally until Sutherland made his move. During a transition between award categories, his voice carried across the parade ground. "General, sir, if I may." A respectful inquiry. Blackwell paused, and looked toward the interruption. Protocol dictated that questions wait until the conclusion of the ceremony, but he nodded. "Proceed, Lieutenant." Sutherland stepped forward from his rank, his movement drawing attention from every section of the formation. "Sir, I wanted to raise a concern about standards and the integrity of military symbols. There are individuals on this base who may be displaying military insignia or markings they haven't earned the right to wear." The temperature of the formation shifted. Personnel glanced at each other. Blackwell's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "That's a serious allegation, Lieutenant. Do you have specific information to support this concern?" Sutherland gestured toward the civilian section. "There's a civilian employee who wears what appears to be military-style tattoo art. When questioned about its meaning, she refuses to explain. Given our obligation to maintain the integrity of military symbols and prevent stolen valor, I believe this warrants investigation." Every eye turned toward the civilian section. Vivian felt the weight of 800 stares. The commissary manager beside her shifted uncomfortably. She remained perfectly still, her face betraying nothing. Captain Brennan spoke up from his position. "Sir, several of us have observed this tattoo. It has characteristics consistent with Special Operations Unit insignia. The individual's refusal to discuss it raises legitimate questions." Murmurs rippled through the formation. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain. Captain Helena Frost, standing with the intelligence officers, had her eyes fixed on Vivian with an intensity that suggested her research over the past days had yielded interesting results. Blackwell raised his hand, and the murmurs died instantly. "Ms. Reese," he said, his voice carrying across the parade ground without need for amplification. "Would you step forward, please?" Vivian moved without hesitation. She walked through the civilian section, past the ranks of enlisted personnel, past the junior officers, until she stood before the podium facing the general. Her steps were measured, and her bearing unconsciously military in its precision. Several senior NCOs noted the way she moved, the tactical awareness in how she positioned herself. General Blackwell looked down at her from the podium, then at her forearm. "Lieutenant Sutherland alleges that you're wearing military insignia you haven't earned. What do you have to say about this?" Vivian met the general's eyes. "The tattoo on my arm is personal, sir. I haven't claimed any military status or position. I perform my civilian duties to the best of my ability. That's all I have to say." "But you won't explain what it means," Sutherland called out. "Because you can't. Because it's fake." Laughter erupted from several sections of the formation. Not mocking laughter exactly, but the kind that came from tension release and the shared sense that someone was being exposed. Vivian heard it wash over her, but didn't react. She kept her eyes on General Blackwell. The general's expression was unreadable. He studied her face for a long moment. Then his gaze dropped again to the tattoo. Something flickered across his features, too quick to identify. "Ms. Reese has been a productive member of our civilian workforce," he said finally. "She has appropriate security clearances and background checks. Unless Lieutenant Sutherland has evidence of actual wrongdoing beyond aesthetic speculation, this matter doesn't belong in a formation." "But, sir," Sutherland pressed, clearly not satisfied with the response. "The integrity of military symbols matters. If she's wearing something that mimics unit insignia, that's disrespectful to everyone who earned the right to bear those marks." The general's jaw tightened slightly. "Your concern is noted, Lieutenant. We will address this through appropriate channels." He turned his attention back to the full formation. "This ceremony will continue. All personnel will maintain proper decorum." Vivian was dismissed with a gesture. She walked back to her position through a gauntlet of stares. Some were hostile, some were curious. A few, mostly from senior enlisted ranks, carried expressions she couldn't quite interpret. Captain Frost was watching her with the focused intensity of someone who had just confirmed a hypothesis. As the ceremony resumed, Vivian stood in her spot and let the words of the general's continuing remarks wash over her. Her heart rate remained steady. Her breathing was controlled. But inside, she felt the careful wall she had built around her past beginning to crack. The tattoo on her arm felt like it was burning, each line a reminder of missions she couldn't talk about, of a unit that officially didn't exist, of a life she had walked away from because the cost had become too high. Sutherland glanced back at her one more time during the ceremony, his expression triumphant. He believed he had won, that he had exposed her as a fraud in front of the entire base. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that General Raymond Blackwell had recognized that tattoo the moment he saw it. And that recognition had changed everything. The days following the ceremony were harder than anything Vivian had faced in months. Word of the public confrontation spread beyond Fort Ashford through social media and phone calls, becoming a story that reduced her to a punchline. The civilian who thought she was special. The woman with the fake military tattoo who got called out in front of everyone. In a logistics office, conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Requisition forms that should have taken hours to process sat on desks for days. When she submitted reports, they came back with unnecessary revision requests that felt more like punishment than quality control. Staff Sergeant Morris, who had always been professional if distant, now barely acknowledged her presence. Corporal Jensen made a point of eating lunch at the table next to hers in the commissary, loudly discussing stolen valor cases with whoever would listen. Private Wilcox had started a rumor that she had been fired from her previous job for lying on her resume. Captain Brennan questioned every supply allocation she approved, demanding additional justification for routine requests. Vivian absorbed it all with the same quiet professionalism she had maintained from the beginning. She arrived early, left late, and did her job with meticulous accuracy. But the isolation was comprehensive. She was being frozen out systematically, her professional input dismissed, her presence barely tolerated. Lieutenant Sutherland had become emboldened to the point of boldness. He had started stopping by the logistics office daily, always with some pretext about supply needs, but really to make comments about authenticity and integrity. His visits drew crowds now. Junior personnel who wanted to watch the show, who found entertainment in seeing the mysterious civilian put in her place. 4:30 in the morning found Vivian running the perimeter track that circled the base housing area. Her pace was steady and fast, her breathing controlled despite the 6 miles already behind her. The pre-dawn darkness held the last coolness before the heat would arrive. She ran alone, as she did every morning, completing the circuit that kept her body sharp even as her civilian life required nothing of her physical capabilities. A pair of senior NCOs doing their own morning run passed her going the opposite direction. They nodded respectfully, their eyes tracking her form and pace with a recognition of people who understood what that level of fitness required. But they didn't stop, didn't speak. The story about her had reached even the parts of the base culture that might have been more discerning. After her run, Vivian returned to the small apartment she rented in town. The place was almost monastic in its simplicity. Minimal furniture, no photographs on the walls. Everything organized with a precision that spoke of habits formed in places where disorder could mean death. She showered, dressed in her standard civilian work attire, and made coffee that she drank while reviewing the day's supply requests on her laptop. The tattoo on her forearm drew her eye as it always did. She traced one of the lines with her finger, remembering the night she had earned it. The mission had been in a place that didn't appear on any map, against targets whose names were still classified. She had been 29 years old and operating with a unit so secretive that even acknowledging its existence was a federal crime. The tattoo had been applied by the unit's master chief, each line representing a specific operational milestone. Only 47 people in the world wore this mark. Only 47 had earned the right. At the office, the day began with a confrontation she hadn't anticipated. Lieutenant Sutherland arrived with a formal complaint about the tactical vehicle allocation for the upcoming field exercise. He claimed Vivian had underprovided the necessary transport, that her incompetence was going to jeopardize training outcomes. He presented his case in the main office with his usual audience, his voice loud enough to carry through the building. Vivian pulled up the allocation spreadsheet and walked him through the numbers. She had assigned vehicles based on the unit strength he had reported and the mission parameters his office had submitted. The math was precise and justified. But Sutherland dismissed her explanation, suggesting she didn't understand military operational needs because she had never served. Maybe if you had actually been in the military instead of just playing dress-up with fake tattoos, you would know how this works, he said. The comment drew laughter from his companions. Vivian closed her laptop and met his eyes. The allocation is correct based on the information your office provided, Lieutenant. If your unit strength has changed, submit an updated request through proper channels. Sutherland leaned across her desk, close enough that she could smell his coffee breath. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. You're here because someone felt sorry for you and handed you a position you're not qualified for. That tattoo on your arm is an insult to everyone who actually served. The office had gone completely silent. Even the phones seemed to have stopped ringing. Vivian felt something cold and familiar settling in her chest, the same feeling that used to come before operations went hot. She forced it down and kept her voice level. Your vehicle allocation will be ready by 0800 tomorrow, she said. Is there anything else you need, Lieutenant? Yeah, Sutherland said, straightening up. I need you to stop pretending you're something you're not. He left with his entourage, their laughter echoing down the corridor. Vivian sat motionless at her desk for several seconds after they departed. Then she opened her laptop again and continued working. That evening, Captain Helena Frost appeared at Vivian's desk just before closing time. The office had mostly cleared out. Frost set down a folder and looked at Vivian with an expression that was neither hostile nor friendly, just intensely focused. I've been doing some research, Frost said quietly. That tattoo on your arm, the pattern and the symbol. I've been through a lot of classified databases over the past week. Vivian's hands stilled on her keyboard. She didn't look up. Most of those databases won't tell me what I want to know, Frost continued. The classifications are too high. The compartmentalization is extreme. But I found enough to know that pattern isn't random. And I found enough to know that people who wear it don't talk about it because they're legally prohibited from talking about it. Vivian finally looked up. Captain Frost held her gaze. I also know that General Blackwell has the highest security clearances on this base, Frost said. And I know he recognized your tattoo immediately during that ceremony. The question is whether Lieutenant Sutherland has any idea what he's actually stepped into. Vivian remained silent. Frost picked up her folder. I'm not asking you to confirm or deny anything, but I thought you should know that some of us are paying attention to details that others are missing. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, the way you carry yourself tells its own story. People who know what to look for can see it. After Frost left, Vivian sat alone in the empty office as the sun set outside the windows. The tattoo on her arm seemed to carry more weight than usual. Each line a secret she had kept for 8 months. Each symbol a reminder of a life she had walked away from. She knew it couldn't stay hidden much longer. General Blackwell had seen it. Captain Frost had figured out enough to be dangerous. And Lieutenant Sutherland's campaign against her was pushing everything toward a breaking point she couldn't control. She locked her computer, gathered her things, and walked out into the warm evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new confrontations, new tests of how long she could maintain this quiet civilian existence. But tonight, alone with her memories and her secrets, Vivian Reese allowed herself to remember what those tattoo lines really meant, and what she had sacrificed to earn them. The emergency meeting was called at 0600 on a Tuesday morning. Vivian arrived at the conference room to find it already crowded with personnel from logistics, operations, and command staff. Lieutenant Sutherland sat near the head of the table, looking confident and prepared. Major Hendricks from operations stood at the front beside a projection screen, displaying supply chain diagrams. The situation was critical. A major joint training exercise involving 3 battalions was scheduled to begin in 10 days. The exercise required precision coordination of equipment, ammunition, food supplies, and fuel across multiple locations. But a key supplier had defaulted on their contract, leaving a massive gap in the logistics chain that threatened to derail the entire operation. Major Hendricks outlined the problem with clinical efficiency. Without the contracted supplies, the exercise would need to be postponed, wasting months of planning and coordination with partner units. Postponement would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and damage Fort Ashford's reputation for operational readiness. We need solutions, he said, looking around the table. And we need them fast. Vivian had spent the previous evening analyzing the supply chain after receiving advance notice of the meeting. She had identified a solution that would work, but it required unconventional thinking and a willingness to take calculated risks. She raised her hand. Major Hendricks nodded to her. Ms. Reese, we can split the supply sourcing across 3 smaller regional suppliers instead of one large contractor, she said. I've already verified their capacity and delivery capabilities. We would need to adjust the distribution timeline and use an alternate staging area, but the exercise could proceed on schedule. She pulled up a detailed spreadsheet on her tablet showing the breakdown of supplies, costs, and delivery windows. The numbers were precise and the logistics were sound. Several people at the table leaned forward to study her proposal. Lieutenant Sutherland cleared his throat loudly. With all due respect, that approach is unnecessarily complicated. We should use the backup contractor we have on standby. Standard protocol. Less risk. Major Hendricks looked at him. The backup contractor can only provide 60% of what we need, Lieutenant. That's why we're in this meeting. Sutherland's jaw tightened. Then we adjust the exercise parameters to match what's available. We scale back the scope and work with what we can get. That's the professional approach. Vivian kept her voice even. Scaling back defeats the purpose of the exercise. The participating units need the full scenario to meet their training objectives. My proposal maintains the full scope while solving the supply problem. Captain Brennan spoke up from across the table. Your proposal also introduces multiple failure points. If any one of those 3 suppliers has problems, the whole thing collapses. Lieutenant Sutherland's approach is safer. Safer, but inadequate, Vivian replied. The backup contractor can't deliver sufficient ammunition for the live-fire portions. Without that, the exercise becomes a very expensive camping trip. Sutherland leaned forward, his voice taking on an edge. Maybe if you had actual military experience, you would understand that we don't take unnecessary risks with mission-critical operations. Your civilian perspective might work for ordering office supplies, but this is beyond your capability to assess. The room shifted uncomfortably. Several people looked down at their notes. Major Hendricks frowned, but said nothing. Vivian met Sutherland's eyes across the table. I've assessed the risk factors. The 3 suppliers I identified have proven track records with military contracts. Their combined capacity exceeds our needs by 12%, giving us a buffer. The distribution timeline is tight, but achievable. This solution works. Or it fails spectacularly, and you're nowhere to be found when people start asking questions, Sutherland shot back. You want us to trust your judgment when you won't even explain that ridiculous tattoo you wear. How are we supposed to believe you have the expertise to handle something this important? The temperature in the room dropped. Major Hendricks raised his hand. Lieutenant, that's enough. We're here to discuss logistics, not personal matters. But Sutherland wasn't finished. Sir, with respect, credibility matters. We're being asked to trust the judgment of someone who's been dishonest about her background. That tattoo she wears is designed to make people think she has military experience. It's deceptive. And now she wants us to risk a major training exercise on her improvement plan. Captain Brennan nodded slowly. The lieutenant has a point, sir. We don't really know Ms. Reese's qualifications beyond her resume. Maybe we should go with a more conservative approach. Other heads around the table began nodding. The momentum was shifting away from Vivian's solution despite its technical superiority. She could see it happening, could feel the weight of their judgment and suspicion overriding the logic of the numbers. Major Hendricks looked torn. He studied Vivian's spreadsheet again, then glanced at Lieutenant Sutherland's confident expression. Ms. Reese, your analysis is thorough, but the lieutenant raises valid concerns about risk management. I think we need to go with a backup contractor and scale the exercise accordingly. Sir, Vivian said, her voice still controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of frustration. That decision will compromise the training objectives and waste resources. The numbers support my approach. The numbers support a risky gamble, Sutherland interjected. And when it fails, you won't be the one explaining to the general why 3 battalions are sitting around with inadequate supplies. Major Hendricks made his decision. We'll proceed with Lieutenant Sutherland's recommendation. Use the backup contractor and adjust the exercise parameters. Ms. Reese, thank you for your input, but we're going a different direction. Vivian closed her tablet and sat back. She didn't argue further. There was no point. The decision had been made based on politics and personal animosity rather than operational logic. She had seen it happen before, in circumstances far more consequential than a training exercise. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, working through the details of the scale-back plan. Vivian listened but didn't contribute further. Sutherland looked pleased with himself, accepting congratulations from Captain Brennan for his level-headed approach. Major Hendricks seemed less certain but committed to the decision. As the meeting broke up, Vivian gathered her materials and headed for the door. She nearly collided with Captain Frost, who had been standing in the hallway outside. "I heard most of that through the door," Frost said quietly. "Your solution was better." Vivian didn't respond. She started walking back toward her office. Frost fell into step beside her. "You know what's going to happen, right? Sutherland's plan has a critical vulnerability. The backup contractor has been having financial problems. There's a good chance they won't deliver on time." "Then I guess we'll deal with that when it happens," Vivian said. "You saw it, didn't you?" Frost pressed. "You analyzed that contractor and saw the red flags. That's why you proposed the alternative approach. You were trying to prevent a failure." Vivian stopped walking and turned to face Frost. "Captain, I submitted my analysis. It was rejected. That's how decisions work. I'm not going to second-guess command staff. Even when you know they're making a mistake based on personal bias rather than operational reality," Frost said. Her eyes were sharp. "Even when you know that mistake is going to blow up in their faces." Vivian resumed walking. Captain Frost watched her go, then pulled out her phone and made a call. She needed to talk to General Blackwell, because what she had just witnessed wasn't just bad decision-making. It was a pattern of personnel allowing their prejudice against Vivian to override sound operational judgment. And when Sutherland's plan inevitably failed, the fallout was going to force questions that would reveal truths some people weren't ready to handle. Back in her office, Vivian pulled up the backup contractor's financial records one more time. The warning signs were there for anyone willing to look. The company was overextended and underfinanced. They would promise delivery and then fail to execute. And when that happened, the exercise would be in chaos with no time to implement an alternative solution. She saved her original proposal to a secure file and went back to her regular work. There was nothing else she could do. The decision had been made. She would watch it unfold and be ready to say, "I told you so," when the moment came. Or more likely, she would quietly help fix the mess without seeking credit, because that was what people with her background did. They solved problems regardless of whether anyone acknowledged their contribution. The tattoo on her arm seemed to ache as she worked. Each line a reminder of missions where the right decision had to be made regardless of politics or personal feelings. Each symbol a testament to the kind of operational discipline that transcended ego and focused on outcomes. She had spent years in an environment where excellence was mandatory and failure meant people died. This wasn't that, but the principles remained the same. And those principles told her that Lieutenant Sutherland had just made a catastrophic mistake, one that would come back to haunt everyone at that table. 6 days before the exercise was scheduled to begin, the first cracks appeared in Lieutenant Sutherland's plan. The backup contractor missed a preliminary delivery deadline, citing logistical complications that would be resolved within 48 hours. Major Hendricks accepted the explanation with visible concern, but maintained confidence that the situation was manageable. Vivian watched the unfolding crisis from her desk without comment. She continued processing routine supply requests and managing the daily logistics that kept the base functioning. When people asked if she had heard about the contractor problems, she replied neutrally that she hoped it would work out. She didn't mention that she had predicted exactly this scenario. By day 4 before the exercise, the contractor had missed 2 more deadlines. The promised ammunition hadn't arrived. Critical vehicle parts were nowhere to be found. The food supplies that were supposed to feed 3 battalions for a week existed only as line items on a spreadsheet. Major Hendricks called another emergency meeting. This time the conference room was tense before anyone even spoke. Lieutenant Sutherland sat with his shoulders rigid, defensive before the first question was asked. Captain Brennan looked exhausted, having spent the previous day trying to chase down the missing supplies through phone calls that led nowhere. Major Hendricks stood at the front of the room with the posture of someone facing an unpleasant reality. The contractor has declared force majeure, Hendricks said without preamble. They're citing supplier failures and transportation disruptions. They cannot fulfill the contract. We have 3 days to solve this or cancel the exercise. The room erupted in overlapping conversations. Sutherland immediately started making excuses about unforeseeable circumstances and how no one could have predicted this outcome. Captain Brennan suggested reaching out to other military installations to borrow supplies. Someone from operations recommended postponing the exercise by 2 weeks to give them time to source alternatives. Major Hendricks let the chaos run for 30 seconds before raising his hand for silence. We don't have 2 weeks. The participating units have already deployed their personnel. We have 3 battalions worth of soldiers arriving in 72 hours, expecting a fully supported training environment. Postponement isn't an option without massive costs and reputational damage. Then what do we do? Sutherland asked, his voice strained. We can't conjure supplies out of thin air. Hendricks looked directly at Vivian. Ms. Reese, you proposed an alternative solution last week. Is it still viable? Every eye in the room turned to her. Vivian met Hendricks' gaze and saw the unspoken acknowledgement there. He knew she had been right. He knew Sutherland's approach had failed exactly as she had warned. But he was also asking if she would help fix the mess despite being ignored. The 3 regional suppliers I identified are still available, Vivian said. I've maintained contact with them as part of my regular vendor management. They can deliver within the timeline if we expedite the contracts today. Today, Sutherland said. That's impossible. Contract approval alone takes 3 days minimum. Vivian pulled up her tablet. I prepared preliminary contract documents last week when I first proposed this solution. They need final approval signatures, but the legal review is already complete. If we move fast, we can have signed contracts by end of business today and first deliveries tomorrow morning. The room went silent. Captain Brennan stared at her. You had contracts ready? Why? Because I knew the backup contractor was going to fail, Vivian said simply. Their financial situation made it a near certainty. I wanted to be prepared with an alternative. Sutherland's face flushed red. You knew and you didn't say anything? You let us walk into this disaster? Vivian's voice remained level, but carried an edge now. I said something. In the last meeting, I presented this exact solution and explained why the backup contractor was inadequate. I was overruled. I was told my judgment couldn't be trusted because I don't have military experience. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Several people looked down at their notes. Major Hendricks closed his eyes briefly. Sutherland stood up abruptly. This is absurd. She's trying to make herself look like some kind of genius because she got lucky with a guess. We should be figuring out real solutions, not listening to someone who's been dishonest about her background from day one. Dishonest, Vivian repeated. The word was quiet but dangerous. You wear a tattoo designed to make people think you have military credentials, Sutherland said, his voice rising. You dodge questions about your experience. You act like you know better than trained officers. And now you claim you predicted this failure? It's manipulation. You probably sabotaged the contractor somehow just to make yourself look good. The accusation was so outrageous that several people gasped. Major Hendricks stepped forward. Lieutenant, you are out of line. Am I? Sutherland shot back. We're 3 days from a catastrophic failure, and the only person with a solution is someone we can't verify or trust. That's not suspicious to anyone else. Captain Frost spoke for the first time from her position near the door. I can verify Ms. Reese's contract preparations. I reviewed them 2 days ago when I suspected the backup contractor might fail. Everything she's saying is documented and accurate. You're in on this too, Sutherland said, turning his anger toward Frost. Of course you are. Intelligence officers covering for each other's games. Frost's expression hardened. Lieutenant, I strongly suggest you stop talking before you say something that ends your career. Major Hendricks moved between them. Everyone sit down. Now. His voice carried command authority that cut through the tension. This is not helping. The room reluctantly settled. Hendricks looked at Vivian. Your solution. Walk me through the details. What exactly do you need to make this work? Vivian outlined the plan with practiced precision. The three suppliers could collectively provide everything needed for the exercise. The costs were within budget. Delivery timelines were tight, but achievable. She had already coordinated the staging areas and distribution logistics. All that was required was official approval and contract signatures. As she spoke, people began taking notes. Captain Brennan asked technical questions about delivery coordination. Someone from operations wanted clarification on the staging area capacity. The conversation shifted from emotional accusations to operational problem-solving. Lieutenant Sutherland sat silent, his jaw clenched, watching his narrative collapse around him. He had spent weeks building a story about Vivian being unqualified and deceptive. Now she was the only person in the room with a viable solution to a crisis his plan had created. Major Hendricks made his decision. Ms. Reese, proceed with your plan. I want those contracts on my desk for signature by 1600 hours today. Everyone else, you're reassigned to support her implementation. This exercise will happen on schedule. He turned to Lieutenant Sutherland. You and I will have a conversation later about decision-making and respect for subject matter expertise, regardless of the source. The meeting broke up with renewed purpose. People hurried out to begin executing Vivian's plan. Captain Frost remained behind with Major Hendricks and Vivian. General Blackwell needs to be briefed on this situation, Frost said to Hendricks. All of it, including the circumstances that led to Ms. Reese's warnings being ignored. Hendricks nodded grimly. I'll request a meeting with him this afternoon. He looked at Vivian. Ms. Reese, I owe you an apology. Your analysis was correct, and we disregarded it for the wrong reasons. Vivian gathered her tablet. I appreciate that, sir. But right now I need to focus on making sure those contracts get finalized. We can discuss lessons learned after the exercise succeeds. She left the conference room and returned to her office. Within minutes, she was on the phone with the first supplier, expediting paperwork and confirming delivery schedules. The tattoo on her forearm seemed to pulse with each call she made, each problem she solved, each piece of the logistics puzzle she locked into place. This was what she had been trained for, not in the obvious ways that people imagine military service, but in the deep operational thinking that made complex systems work under pressure. In the ability to see 3 moves ahead and prepare for contingencies. In the discipline to maintain professionalism, even when dismissed and disrespected. By the time the sun set that evening, all 3 contracts were signed and deliveries were confirmed for the next morning. The exercise would proceed. 3 battalions would get the training they needed. And Vivian had just demonstrated exactly the kind of competence that made people wonder who she really was. In his office across the base, General Raymond Blackwell listened to Major Hendricks brief him on the supply crisis and its resolution. When Hendricks mentioned the tattoo on Vivian's arm and the ongoing questions about her background, the general's expression shifted. He pulled up a classified file on his computer and studied it for several minutes. Then he picked up his phone and made a call to a number that didn't appear in any directory. The conversation was brief, and the questions were specific. When he hung up, he sat back in his chair and stared at nothing for a long moment. He knew exactly who Vivian Reese was. He knew what that tattoo meant. And tomorrow morning, he would do something he should have done the moment he saw her in that formation. He would acknowledge the truth, even if it meant revealing secrets that were supposed to stay buried forever. The supplies arrived exactly on schedule. By 0700 the next morning, 3 separate convoys had delivered everything needed for the joint training exercise. Ammunition, vehicle parts, food supplies, fuel, medical equipment. Every item accounted for. Every delivery coordinated with the precision Vivian had promised. Personnel who had doubted her plan now worked efficiently to distribute materials according to her logistics framework. Lieutenant Sutherland watched the smooth operation from a distance, his expression unreadable. He had been conspicuously absent from the coordination efforts, reassigned to administrative duties by Major Hendricks. The implied demotion was obvious to everyone on base. His campaign against Vivian had backfired spectacularly. At 0900, Vivian received a message on her office phone. General Blackwell requests your presence in his office at 1000 hours. The voice was the general's aide, formal and professional. It was not a request, despite the wording. Vivian acknowledged the message and continued her work. She finalized the last distribution schedules, confirmed staging area assignments, and ensured backup protocols were in place. By 0945, she had cleared her immediate responsibilities. She stood, straightened her blazer, and walked across the base toward the command building. The general's office was on the 3rd floor with windows overlooking the parade grounds. His aide directed Vivian to wait in the outer office. She sat in one of the chairs with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, breathing controlled. She knew what this meeting would be about. She had known since the moment the general's eyes had locked onto her tattoo during that formation. At precisely 1000 hours, the door opened. General Blackwell stood in the doorway. Ms. Reese, please come in. His office was exactly what she expected. American flag in the corner. Photographs of units and deployments on the walls. Commendation plaques and awards displayed with pride, but not ostentation. A large desk with neat stacks of paperwork. And sitting on the credenza behind his desk, a shadow box containing medals and ribbons that told a story of decades in service. The general closed the door and gestured to a chair. Please sit. Vivian sat. The general moved to his desk, but didn't sit immediately. Instead, he rolled up his left sleeve with deliberate movements. The tattoo on his forearm was identical to hers. The same geometric pattern. The same intersecting lines. The same small symbol that looked tribal, but was actually a classified unit designation. He sat down and met her eyes. Task Force Shadow, he said quietly. How long has it been since you left? 3 years, sir, Vivian replied. Her voice was steady. I retired after the Kandahar operation. The general nodded slowly. I remember that operation. Not the details because they're compartmentalized above my clearance now. But I remember the aftermath. 3 team members wounded, 1 critically. Mission success, but at significant cost. He paused. You were the critical casualty. Vivian didn't respond immediately. The memory of that night was still sharp. The compound, the target, the ambush that had turned a surgical strike into a desperate firefight, the round that had shattered her shoulder and ended her operational career. Yes, sir, she finally said. General Blackwell leaned back in his chair. I was with Shadow from 98 to 2006. 8 years of operations that don't exist in any official record. When I rotated out, there were 31 living members with the tattoo. You said 3 years since you left. That means there are what, 47 now? 47 when I retired, Vivian confirmed. I haven't maintained contact with the unit since my medical separation. The general studied her with the intensity of someone who understood exactly what that tattoo represented. Every line on that mark is earned through operations most people can't imagine. Every member of Shadow has done things that would be considered impossible by conventional forces. And you've been sitting in a logistics office on my base for 8 months being harassed by a junior officer who has no idea who you are. I chose this assignment, sir, Vivian said. I wanted something quiet after I left the unit. Logistics suited my skills and didn't require the operational tempo I couldn't maintain anymore. She paused. I didn't expect the tattoo to become an issue. Because you thought people wouldn't recognize it, the general said. And you were mostly right. Shadow's operational security is so tight that even most flag officers don't know the unit exists. But you made one mistake. He tapped his own tattoo. You kept wearing the mark. And eventually, someone like me was going to see it and recognize what it means. Vivian met his gaze. Would you have me hide it, sir? This tattoo represents 8 years of my life. Operations where I watched teammates die. Missions that prevented attacks that would have killed thousands. I earned every line on this mark with blood and sacrifice. I won't cover it, because someone might ask uncomfortable questions. The general's expression softened slightly. I'm not suggesting you should. I'm saying I understand why you kept it visible despite the complications. That mark is part of your identity. It's a testament to service that can never be publicly acknowledged. Taking it off would be like erasing the most important years of your life. He stood and walked to his window, looking out over the base. The problem is that Lieutenant Sutherland has made your tattoo a focal point of base gossip. He's questioned your integrity publicly. He suggested you're attempting stolen valor. And now he's embarrassed after your logistics plan, save and exercise his approach nearly destroyed. He's not going to let this drop quietly. Vivian remained seated. What are you suggesting, sir? I'm suggesting that tomorrow morning I'm calling an all-hands formation, the general said, turning back to face her. And I'm going to explain exactly what that tattoo means. Within the limits of classification, I'm going to tell 800 personnel that you are a decorated combat veteran from a unit so classified that most of them will never be cleared to know its full designation. I'm going to make it clear that questioning your qualifications or integrity is not just disrespectful, but ignorant. Vivian felt something tighten in her chest. Sir, with respect, I left Shadow specifically to avoid that kind of attention. I took a civilian position because I wanted a quiet life. Making a public statement about my background contradicts everything I've been trying to build here. The general sat back down and leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. Ms. Reese, I understand your desire for privacy, but the situation has evolved beyond your control. Your competence has already drawn attention. Your tattoo has become a symbol of conflict on this base. And Lieutenant Sutherland's behavior has created an environment where your authority and expertise are constantly questioned. That affects operational effectiveness. He paused, choosing his words carefully. More importantly, you saved a major training exercise through expertise and preparation that directly reflects your shadow training. You demonstrated exactly the kind of operational thinking that makes that unit legendary. People are already asking questions about how a civilian logistics coordinator pulled off something that professional military planners couldn't. The truth is going to come out one way or another. I'd rather control how it's revealed. Vivian sat silent for a long moment. She thought about the 8 months of isolation and dismissal, about Sutherland's campaign of harassment, about the constant weight of maintaining a cover that was never meant to withstand this level of scrutiny. The general was right. The situation had moved beyond her ability to manage quietly. What exactly will you tell them, sir? She asked. The truth within classification limits, the general replied. That you serve in a Tier 1 Special Operations Unit for 8 years. That you received multiple commendations, including a Silver Star that's classified. That you were medically retired after being wounded in action. That the tattoo on your arm is a legitimate unit designation that only 47 people in the world have earned the right to wear. And that anyone who questions your qualifications or integrity from this point forward will answer to me personally. Vivian absorbed the words. It was more exposure than she wanted, more attention than she had sought when she took this quiet civilian job. But it was also validation that she had been denied for 8 months. Recognition that her expertise and service deserved respect regardless of whether she wore a uniform anymore. When is the formation, sir? She asked. 0800 tomorrow morning, the general said. I'll have my aide notify all personnel tonight. You don't need to say anything during the formation. I'll handle the announcement, but I want you standing beside me when I do it. The visual of us showing our tattoos together will make the point more effectively than words alone. Vivian stood. Understood, sir. The general stood as well and extended his hand. For what it's worth, Ms. Reese, I'm sorry you've had to deal with this situation. You deserved better treatment from the moment you arrived on this base. Tomorrow I'll make sure everyone understands that. Vivian shook his hand. Thank you, sir. She left his office and walked back across the base in the afternoon heat. The tattoo on her arm felt different now. Not hidden, not a source of conflict, but something that would soon be acknowledged publicly for what it truly represented. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. Relief maybe, or resignation, or perhaps just acceptance that some secrets couldn't stay buried forever. That evening, notification went out to all Fort Ashford personnel. Mandatory formation at 0800. All hands required. No exceptions. The message didn't explain why, but word spread quickly that it involved the general making a major announcement. Speculation ran wild through the barracks and offices. Lieutenant Sutherland received the notification in his quarters. He read it 3 times, a sense of dread building in his chest. He thought about the general's tattoo, about Captain Frost's warnings, about the way senior NCOs had started looking at Vivian with a respect he couldn't understand. Something was coming, something that would change everything he thought he knew. In her apartment in town, Vivian sat on her couch with a cup of tea and stared at her tattoo. Tomorrow the whole base would know. Tomorrow the quiet civilian life she had built would transform into something else. She wasn't afraid. Fear had been trained out of her years ago in circumstances far more dangerous than a formation on a peaceful military base. But she was uncertain. And for someone who had spent 8 years operating with absolute precision in the most chaotic environments imaginable, uncertainty felt strange. She finished her tea, set the cup aside, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. She had survived far worse. And at least after tomorrow, Lieutenant Sutherland would finally understand exactly who he had been harassing for 8 months. That realization alone might almost be worth the loss of anonymity. The morning arrived with unusual tension hanging over Fort Ashford. Personnel assembled on the parade grounds earlier than required, clustering in groups and speaking in low voices about what the emergency formation might address. Some speculated about deployment orders. Others wondered if there had been a security breach. A few who had been paying closer attention suspected it had something to do with the logistics coordinator and the ongoing controversy about her tattoo. Vivian arrived at 0730 and was directed to a staging area behind the command building. General Blackwell was already there, reviewing notes with his aide. He looked up when Vivian approached and nodded. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as I can be, sir," Vivian replied. She wore her standard professional attire. The blazer sleeves rolled to 3/4 length, so the tattoo on her forearm was clearly visible. The general studied her for a moment. "You don't have to say anything. Just stand with me when I make the announcement. Let them see the tattoo. Let them make the connection. That will be enough." "Understood, sir." At 0750, the formation was complete. 800 personnel stood in organized ranks across the parade grounds. Officers and enlisted, active duty and civilian staff. Every section of the base represented. The morning sun was already warm, promising another hot day. Conversations gradually died away as the command staff took their positions. Lieutenant Sutherland stood with his platoon near the center of the formation. He had barely slept, his mind running through scenarios of what this announcement might be. He kept glancing toward where Vivian should have been standing with the civilian section, but her spot was empty. That absence felt ominous. Captain Helena Frost stood with the intelligence officers, her expression neutral, but her attention focused. She had spent significant time over the past weeks piecing together fragments of information about Task Force Shadow. She knew what was coming. She had tried to warn Sutherland multiple times, but he had dismissed her concerns as irrelevant. Now he would learn the hard way. At precisely 0800, General Blackwell walked onto the raised platform that served as the formation command position. Vivian walked beside him. The sight of a civilian standing beside the base commander drew immediate attention. Murmurs rippled through the ranks. "Formation, attention," the command sergeant major called. 800 pairs of boots came together with a unified crack. General Blackwell stepped to the microphone. "At ease. You may have been wondering why I called this formation. I'm here to address a situation that has been developing on this base for several months. A situation involving respect, integrity, and a recognition of service that cannot be publicly acknowledged through normal channels." The parade ground was absolutely silent. Every eye was fixed on the general. 8 months ago, we welcomed Ms. Vivian Reese to our civilian logistics staff. She came to us with excellent credentials and has performed her duties with exceptional competence. But some personnel on this base have questioned her qualifications. Some have suggested she is dishonest about her background. And specifically, some have claimed that the tattoo she wears on her left arm is an attempt at stolen valor. Sutherland felt his stomach drop. This was about her, about the tattoo, about everything he had been saying for months. I'm here to tell you that those accusations are not just wrong, the general continued. They are ignorant, and they reflect poorly on our ability as military professionals to recognize excellence regardless of whether someone wore the uniform. He paused and rolled up his left sleeve with deliberate movements. The tattoo on his forearm was clearly visible to the front ranks, and word began spreading quickly to those who couldn't see directly. This mark on my arm is the official designation of a unit that most of you will never be cleared to know about. I can tell you it falls under Joint Special Operations Command. I can tell you that fewer than 50 people in the world have earned the right to wear this tattoo. I can tell you that earning it requires years of operations at the highest levels of military capability. What I cannot tell you is the unit's full designation or operational history, because those details are classified above my current clearance level. The formation was frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. The implications were becoming clear. General Blackwell gestured to Vivian. Ms. Reese, please show the formation your tattoo. Vivian stepped forward and raised her left arm. The tattoo was identical to the general's. Even from a distance, those with clear sight lines could see the matching geometric patterns, the same intersecting lines, the same symbol. Ms. Reese served in this unit for 8 years, the general said. She participated in operations I cannot describe. She received commendations I cannot name because they're classified. She was wounded in action during a mission that saved American lives, and she was medically retired with full honors. That tattoo on her arm was earned through sacrifice and service that most of you cannot imagine. Sutherland's face had gone pale. Around him, his platoon members were turning to look at him with expressions ranging from shock to anger. He wanted to sink into the ground and disappear. I want to be absolutely clear about something, the general continued, his voice hardening. Ms. Reese has never claimed to have military status. She has never sought recognition or special treatment. She took a civilian position on this base because she wanted to continue serving in a capacity that didn't require the operational tempo she could no longer maintain. She has done her job with excellence while enduring harassment and disrespect from personnel who should have known better. Captain Frost caught Sutherland's eye across the formation. Her expression said, "I told you," so more clearly than words ever could. From this point forward, the general said, anyone who questions Ms. Reese's qualifications, integrity, or right to wear that tattoo will answer to me personally. She has earned more respect than most of us will achieve in our entire careers. The fact that her service is classified does not make it less real or less significant. He let the words settle over the formation. The silence was profound. 800 people processing the revelation that the quiet civilian they had dismissed or mocked was actually a decorated special operations veteran from a unit so secret that even the base commander couldn't access its full records. There's a broader lesson here, General Blackwell continued. We are a military community. We pride ourselves on recognizing excellence and honoring service. But excellence doesn't always announce itself. Service doesn't always come with visible markers that everyone can recognize. Some of the most capable people in our ranks operate quietly, without seeking attention or validation. It is our responsibility to recognize that capability regardless of how it presents itself. He paused. Lieutenant Sutherland, front and center. The words cut through the silence like a blade. Sutherland felt every eye turned toward him. His legs felt weak as he stepped forward from his rank and marched to stand before the platform. He came to attention and saluted. The general returned the salute, but his expression was stone. Lieutenant, you have spent months questioning Ms. Reese's integrity and qualifications. You have publicly accused her of stolen valor. You have dismissed her professional expertise. And most significantly, You allowed your personal bias to override sound operational judgment, nearly causing a catastrophic failure of a major training exercise. Do you have anything to say? Sutherland's mouth was dry. Sir, He paused, searching for words that wouldn't make this worse. I was wrong, sir. I made assumptions based on incomplete information. I allowed personal prejudice to affect my professional judgment. The general's expression didn't soften. Your behavior has been unacceptable for an officer. You will submit a formal written apology to Ms. Reese by end of business today. You will also complete training on unconscious bias and professional conduct. And you will seriously examine whether you have the judgment required to lead soldiers. Am I clear? Crystal clear, sir, Sutherland managed. Return to your position. Sutherland saluted, didn't about face, and marched back to his rank. He could feel the weight of judgment from every person in the formation. His career wasn't over, but it would never be the same. The officer who had harassed a decorated special operations veteran based on ignorance and prejudice. That would follow him forever. General Blackwell addressed the formation one final time. We are better than what has happened here. We will learn from this situation and ensure it doesn't happen again. Respect is earned through competence and character, not through rank or position or visible credentials. Remember that. Dismissed. The formation broke up gradually. Personnel moved slowly, still processing what they had heard. Small groups formed immediately to discuss the revelation. Vivian became the center of attention in a way she had never wanted, dozens of eyes tracking her as she walked with the general back toward the command building. Lieutenant Sutherland stood motionless as his platoon dispersed around him. Several soldiers gave him looks of profound disappointment before walking away. Captain Brennan approached and shook his head without saying anything. The message was clear. Sutherland had destroyed his own credibility through willful ignorance. Captain Frost walked past him and paused. I tried to warn you, she said quietly. I told you there was more to her story. But you were so convinced you were right that you couldn't see what was obvious to anyone who knew how to look. Sutherland didn't respond. What would he say? She was right. He had been warned. He had ignored every sign. And now he stood revealed as exactly the kind of officer who let ego override judgment. Across the parade grounds, senior NCOs were having quiet conversations about what they had just witnessed. Master sergeants and first sergeants who had decades of experience. Many of them had suspected something unusual about Vivian's background. The way she moved, the way she processed information, the quiet competence that suggested training far beyond typical civilian experience. Now they knew, and now they understood why she had maintained such careful control even under harassment. In the command building, General Blackwell walked Vivian to a private conference room. Once inside with the door closed, he let out a long breath. That went as well as it could have, he said. Vivian leaned against the wall. Thank you, sir, for doing that. I know it complicated things. You earned that recognition, the general replied, even if it's years late and incomplete because of classification. He looked at his own tattoo, then at hers. 47 people in the world wear this mark. We're supposed to watch out for each other. I should have done this 8 months ago. You couldn't have known I was here, Vivian said. But I saw the tattoo during that first formation, the general countered. I recognized it immediately. I should have acted, then, instead of waiting for things to get worse. That was a failure of leadership on my part. Vivian managed a slight smile. Well, it's done now. Everyone knows. The question is what happens next. The hours following the formation were surreal. Vivian returned to her office to find it transformed from a place of isolation to something resembling a shrine. Someone had placed a small American flag on her desk. A handwritten note from Staff Sergeant Morris apologized for months of cold treatment. Corporal Jensen had left a coffee card with a message that simply said, "Thank you for your service." She sat at her desk and stared at these offerings, unsure how to process them. For 8 months, she had been invisible or worse, a target of suspicion and mockery. Now, suddenly, she was being treated like a hero. The shift was disorienting. The phone rang constantly. Personnel calling with supply requests they had previously submitted through other channels to avoid working with her. officers asking for her input on logistics problems they had solved independently before. It was as if the entire base had suddenly remembered she existed and possessed expertise worth consulting. Captain Frost appeared in her doorway around 1100 hours. She knocked lightly on the frame, even though the door was open. "May I come in?" Vivian gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Captain." Frost sat and studied Vivian's face. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly," Vivian said, "I'm not sure. This morning I was a civilian logistics coordinator people barely tolerated. Now I'm getting thank you notes and coffee cards. It's a lot to process." Frost nodded. The base has a short memory for its own bad behavior. Yesterday you were suspect. Today you're practically a legend. Give it a week, and people will start acting like they always respected you. Vivian allowed herself a slight smile. "Is that supposed to be comforting?" "No," Frost said. "It's supposed to be realistic. People don't like admitting they were wrong. It's easier to rewrite the narrative and pretend they knew all along." She paused. "For what it's worth, I did try to figure out who you were. The tattoo pattern, the way you moved, the operational thinking. I knew there was something. I just couldn't access the records to confirm it." "You got closer than most," Vivian acknowledged. "That call you made to General Blackwell after the supply crisis meeting. That's what prompted him to act, isn't it?" Frost didn't deny it. "I could see where things were heading. Sutherland was escalating. The harassment was affecting your ability to do your job effectively. And you had just saved a major exercise through competence that shouldn't have existed in a civilian logistics coordinator. Someone needed to intervene before the situation became completely untenable." "Thank you," Vivian said simply. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Frost spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" "You don't have to answer." "Go ahead." "Why logistics? After everything you did in Shadow, why take a desk job managing supply chains?" Vivian looked at her tattoo, tracing one of the lines with her finger. "Because I needed something that used my skills without requiring me to carry a weapon. Because I wanted to solve problems that didn't end with body counts. Because after 8 years of operations where everything was classified and every success was invisible, I wanted to do work where results were measurable and acknowledged." She paused. "And because my shoulder was destroyed badly enough that I couldn't maintain operational readiness. Medical retirement sounds noble, but the reality is my body gave out. This was what I could still do, what I could still contribute." Frost absorbed that. "Does it satisfy you, this kind of work?" "Some days," Vivian said. "It's not the same as what I did before. Nothing will ever be the same as that. But it matters. Logistics keeps operations running. Equipment gets where it needs to go. People eat, vehicles function, missions succeed. That matters, even if it's not as dramatic as direct action operations." The phone rang again. Vivian let it go to voicemail. "You're going to need to decide how you want to handle this new dynamic," Frost said. "People are going to treat you differently now. They're going to ask questions you can't answer. They're going to project their own ideas of what special operations means onto you. You'll need boundaries." "I've been thinking about that," Vivian admitted. "I don't want to be anyone's inspiration or their cautionary tale. I just want to do my job. But I know that's probably not realistic anymore." "It's not," Frost confirmed. "The general made sure of that when he put you on that platform. You're visible now, whether you want to be or not. The question is how you manage that visibility." Before Vivian could respond, there was a knock on the door frame. Lieutenant Sutherland stood there, his posture rigid, his face carefully neutral. He held an envelope in his hand. "Ms. Reese," he said. His voice was strained. "May I have a moment of your time?" Captain Frost stood. "I'll leave you to it." She nodded to both of them and left, closing the door behind her. Sutherland remained standing near the door. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. The envelope trembled slightly in his hand. "You can sit," Vivian said. He sat but remained on the edge of the chair. "Thank you." He set the envelope on her desk. "This is my formal written apology as ordered by General Blackwell. It's comprehensive and it's sincere." Vivian picked up the envelope but didn't open it. "Is there something else, Lieutenant?" Sutherland swallowed hard. "I owe you more than what's in that letter. I spent months undermining you, mocking you, encouraging others to dismiss you. I made assumptions based on nothing but my own arrogance. And I nearly caused a catastrophic failure because I couldn't see past my own prejudice. He met her eyes with visible effort. I was wrong about everything. About you, about the tattoo, about your qualifications. I was so convinced I was protecting military standards that I couldn't recognize excellence when it was standing right in front of me. That's a failure I'm going to have to live with. Vivian studied him for a long moment. What you did was more than just wrong, Lieutenant. You created a hostile work environment. You encouraged others to disrespect someone based purely on appearance and status. You let your ego override sound judgment and almost derailed an important operation. Those aren't small mistakes. Sutherland nodded miserably. I know. I've spent all morning thinking about how I got here. How I let myself become that kind of officer. The kind who values rank and appearances over competence. The kind who leads through intimidation rather than inspiration. He paused. General Blackwell suggested I examine whether I have the judgment to lead soldiers. He's right to question that. Vivian leaned back in her chair. So what are you going to do about it? I'm going to learn, Sutherland said. I'm going to complete the training the general ordered. I'm going to examine my biases and figure out where they come from. And I'm going to be better. Because if I can't be better than this, I don't deserve to wear this uniform. Actions matter more than words, Vivian said. You can apologize all you want, but what matters is how you treat people going forward. How you lead when no one is watching. How you respond when you're wrong. Sutherland stood. You're right. And I promise you, I will do better. He hesitated. For what it's worth, watching you handle that supply crisis was educational. The way you had contingencies prepared. The way you coordinated multiple suppliers under impossible timelines. That was exceptional work. I should have recognized that instead of fighting it. Vivian nodded acknowledgement, but said nothing. Sutherland left, closing the door quietly behind him. Vivian sat alone in her office and opened the envelope. The apology inside was indeed comprehensive. 3 pages detailing every instance where he had been wrong, every time he had undermined her, every moment where his behavior had been unacceptable. It was thorough and appeared genuine. She set it aside and looked out the window at the base beyond. The training exercise was underway, now using the supplies she had secured. 3 battalions conducting operations that would enhance their readiness and capabilities. All of it possible because she had seen the problem, prepared the solution, and maintained professionalism even when dismissed and disrespected. That was the real measure of success. Not the apologies or the recognition, but the mission accomplished, the work done correctly, the contribution made regardless of acknowledgement. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from General Blackwell. Dinner tonight at my quarters. 1800 hours. There are some people I want you to meet. Other members of the shadow community who are in the area. Thought you might appreciate the company. Vivian smiled slightly and typed a response. I'll be there, sir. Thank you. She returned to her work, processing requisitions and managing supply chains with the same competence she had always brought to the task. But something had shifted. The isolation was gone. The constant suspicion had evaporated. People passed her office and nodded respectfully. Phone calls came through with genuine requests rather than tests designed to trip her up. It wasn't the quiet civilian life she had envisioned when she took this position. But maybe that life had never been realistic for someone with her background. Maybe carrying the tattoo of Task Force Shadow meant accepting that some part of her would always be visible, always be recognized by those who knew what to look for. She could live with that. She had survived far worse. And at least now, when people saw her tattoo, they would understand what it meant. Not the classified details, not the specific operations, but the fundamental truth that those lines represented sacrifice, service, and a level of excellence most people would never achieve. That understanding, hard-won and long delayed, was enough. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Master Sergeant Coleman appeared at Vivian's office around 1400 hours. He was a career Special Forces soldier with 26 years of service and the kind of weathered face that came from multiple combat deployments. Vivian had seen him around the base, but they had never spoken directly. He knocked on her doorframe. Ms. Reese, do you have a minute? Of course, Vivian said, gesturing to the chair. Coleman sat with the easy posture of someone comfortable in any environment. I want to stop by personally, he said. I've been on this base for 2 years as the senior enlisted advisor for Special Operations Liaison. When you arrived 8 months ago, I noticed things about you. The way you moved, the situational awareness, the tactical thinking. He paused. I suspected you had some kind of special operations background. Maybe support element, maybe intelligence. But I never imagined Shadow. That's a whole different level. Vivian nodded slowly. You were one of the few who didn't join in the harassment. Coleman's expression was serious. I've been doing this long enough to know that people with real operational experience don't advertise it. They don't need to prove anything. When I saw how you handled yourself under pressure, especially during that supply crisis, I knew there was more to your story. I just didn't know how much more. He leaned forward slightly. Shadow doesn't take just anyone. The selection process alone eliminates 95% of candidates. The ones who make it through are the best of the best. Tier 1 doesn't begin to describe it. So when the general made that announcement this morning, a lot of things suddenly made sense. What brings you here, Sergeant? Vivian asked. 2 things, Coleman said. First, to apologize for not stepping in sooner. I should have shut down Sutherland's campaign months ago. I had the rank and the credibility to do it. I chose not to get involved, and that was wrong. You had no obligation to intervene, Vivian said. Yes, I did, Coleman countered. We're supposed to watch out for each other in the special operations community. I saw what was happening, and I stayed silent because it wasn't my direct responsibility. That's not good enough. You deserve better. Vivian appreciated the honesty. What's the second thing? Coleman pulled out a folder from the messenger bag he carried. I've been asked to brief you on something. With the general's approval, I'm organizing an informal gathering tonight after the official dinner. Some of the special operations veterans on this base. People who understand what you've been through and what that tattoo means. Not Shadow members, obviously. There aren't any others here. But operators who respect what you accomplished. He opened the folder and showed her a list of names. These are people who want to meet you properly. Without the baggage of the past 8 months. Without the drama. Just professionals acknowledging another professional. Vivian scanned the list. She recognized several names. Senior NCOs, a few warrant officers, one lieutenant colonel who ran the base's Special Operations Coordination Cell. All people with significant operational backgrounds. This isn't mandatory, Coleman continued. And it's not going to be some kind of ceremony or formal event. Just drinks and conversation with people who get it. Who understand what it means to serve in units that don't officially exist. Who know what it costs. Vivian considered the offer. For 8 months, she had maintained careful distance from everyone on the base. Self-protection born from years of operational security and reinforced by the hostile environment. But the isolation had taken its own toll. The idea of being among people who understood, who didn't need explanations or justifications, was appealing. What time? She asked. 200 hours at the NCO club. Informal dress. No speeches or presentations. Just operators being operators. I'll be there, Vivian said. Coleman stood and extended his hand. Looking forward to it. And Ms. Reese, for what it's worth, the way you handled yourself these past months. The professionalism under harassment. The competence despite being undermined. That showed character that goes beyond any operation or mission. You earned respect through how you carried yourself, not just through what you did in shadow. After Coleman left, Vivian sat quietly for several minutes. The day had been a cascade of revelations and transformations. From a morning formation that exposed her background to the apologies and recognition that followed. Each interaction forced her to recalibrate her understanding of her place on this base. The joint training exercise was proceeding smoothly in the field. Status reports came in throughout the afternoon, showing that all supplies were where they needed to be, equipment was functioning properly, and operations were on schedule. The exercise Sutherland had nearly destroyed was now succeeding precisely because Vivian's plan had been implemented. Major Hendricks stopped by around 1600 hours. He looked tired but satisfied. Your logistics framework is working perfectly, he said without preamble. 0 major issues. All deliveries on time. The battalion commanders are impressed with the coordination. That's good to hear, Vivian replied. Hendricks sat down uninvited. I owe you more than an apology, he said. I made a command decision based on politics rather than operational merit. I dismissed your expertise because of personal bias against someone I didn't understand. That's a leadership failure I need to own. You made the decision you thought was right at the time, Vivian said diplomatically. No, Hendrix interrupted. I made the decision that was politically easier. I knew your plan was better. The analysis was clear. But I went with Sutherland because challenging him meant challenging the social dynamics on this base. I took the path of least resistance and nearly caused a disaster because of it. He met her eyes. I've been in the Army for 19 years. I've commanded at multiple levels. I thought I understood leadership. But watching how you handled this situation taught me something important. Real leadership isn't about maintaining social harmony. It's about making the right call regardless of personal cost. You did that. I didn't. I won't make that mistake again. Vivian appreciated the honesty, even if she found the praise uncomfortable. Just make sure the exercise succeeds, Major. That's what matters now. After Hendrix left, Vivian finished her work for the day and headed back to her apartment to prepare for the evening. The dinner at General Blackwell's quarters was at 1800 hours. The informal gathering at the NCO club would follow at 2000, two events that would have been unimaginable just 24 hours ago. At General Blackwell's residence, she found a small group already assembled. The general introduced her to Colonel Patricia Morrison, a retired Army intelligence officer who had worked with Shadow during her active duty years. Also present was a former Navy SEAL Master Chief who now worked as a civilian contractor on base, and a Marine Corps colonel who served as the assistant base commander. The conversation was easy and professional. These were people who understood operational security and didn't ask questions that couldn't be answered. They talked about the challenges of transitioning from active duty to civilian life, about maintaining identity when your most significant accomplishments could never be publicly acknowledged, about finding purpose after leaving units that demanded everything. General Blackwell raised his glass in a toast. To those who serve in silence, he said, and to the recognition that comes late but matters nonetheless. They drank and continued talking. Colonel Morrison shared stories about the intelligence support she had provided to classified operations. The SEAL Master Chief talked about the difficulty of explaining his career to people who couldn't be told what he actually did. The Marine Colonel discussed the importance of creating environments where veterans with classified backgrounds could contribute without constant suspicion. It was the first time in 3 years that Vivian had been among people who truly understood her experience. The relief of not having to explain or justify was profound. These were peers who recognized what that tattoo meant without needing details, who respected the sacrifice without requiring specifics. At 2000 hours, Vivian arrived at the NCO club to find Master Sergeant Coleman had assembled exactly the kind of gathering he had promised. 15 special operations veterans in civilian clothes, drinking beer and talking with the easy camaraderie of people who had shared similar experiences. They welcomed her without fanfare, making space at the bar and including her in ongoing conversations about everything from equipment preferences to the challenges of post-military life. A Green Beret staff sergeant named Torres bought her a drink. Shadow's reputation is legendary, even among people who can't know the details, he said. The few operators I've met who worked with your unit had nothing but respect. Said Shadow made the rest of us look like amateurs. Vivian smiled slightly. Every unit has its strengths. Shadow's was extreme specialization and operational security. But we learned from all the Tier 1 units. SEALs, Delta, Rangers, Special Forces. We stood on the shoulders of everyone who came before. The conversation flowed naturally. Stories were shared within the limits of classification. Lessons learned were discussed. The challenges of maintaining operational skills in garrison environments were debated. It was professional talk among professionals, the kind of interaction Vivian had missed more than she realized. Around 20 to 100 hours, Master Sergeant Coleman called for attention. He raised his glass. To Ms. Reese, he said, who showed us all what it means to maintain standards under pressure, who demonstrated that competence speaks louder than rank. and who proved that the quiet professionals are often the most capable. The group raised their glasses. To Vivian, they said in unison. She felt something loosen in her chest. For 8 months, she had carried the weight of isolation and suspicion. For 3 years before that, she had navigated the difficult transition from classified operations to civilian life. But here, in this moment, surrounded by people who understood, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. She felt recognized, not for the classified missions that would remain secret, not for the commendations that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, but for the character and competence she brought to everything she did, for the professionalism that transcended uniform or rank, for the excellence that defined who she was regardless of context. "Thank you," she said simply. The words felt inadequate, but they were sincere. The gathering continued for another hour before people began drifting away to their respective homes and barracks. Vivian left the NCO club feeling lighter than she had in months. The tattoo on her arm no longer felt like a burden or a source of conflict. It was what it had always been, a mark of service earned through sacrifice, a connection to a community that understood what that service meant, a reminder of who she was beneath all the complications. She drove back to her apartment through the quiet night and thought about everything that had changed in a single day. The public revelation, the apologies, the recognition, the connections with people who understood her background. It was overwhelming and exhausting and strangely satisfying. Tomorrow the base would continue its normal operations. The training exercise would proceed. Work would need to be done. But the environment had transformed completely. She was no longer invisible or suspected. She was acknowledged and respected. The quiet civilian life she had sought was gone, replaced by something more complicated but also more genuine. She could live with that. She had learned long ago that control was an illusion. You could plan and prepare, but circumstances always evolved in unexpected ways. The key was adapting while maintaining your core principles, staying true to who you were regardless of external pressure. That was what the tattoo really represented. Not just the missions or the unit, but the commitment to excellence and integrity that defined a certain kind of person. The kind who served without needing recognition, but accepted it with grace when it came. The kind who maintained standards even when no one was watching. The kind who understood that true strength was often quiet until circumstances demanded otherwise. Vivian Reese was that kind of person. Always had been. Always would be. And now, finally, everyone else knew it too. The following morning brought a different kind of attention. Vivian arrived at her office to find a small crowd gathered in the hallway outside. Junior enlisted personnel, young soldiers who looked uncertain about whether they should be there. When they saw her approaching, they straightened instinctively. A young specialist stepped forward, her name tape reading Harrison. "Ms. Reese, ma'am, we wanted to thank you for your service, for what you did." Several others nodded in agreement. Vivian felt uncomfortable with the reverence in their voices. "I appreciate that, but it's not necessary. I was just doing my job, same as anyone else." "But it wasn't the same," Harrison insisted. "What you did in Shadow, that's like the absolute highest level. And then you came here and worked a regular job, and nobody knew. That's really cool." Vivian managed a slight smile. "The job I do now matters just as much as what I did before. Logistics keeps operations running. Every role in the military matters." "Can I ask what it was like?" another young soldier said. "Being in special operations as a woman? That's got to be really hard." Vivian chose her words carefully. "It was challenging, but not because of gender. Shadow selected based purely on capability. If you could meet the standards, you were in. If you couldn't, you were out. That's how it should be everywhere." The group asked a few more questions, most of which Vivian deflected due to classification. But she understood what they were really seeking. They wanted to believe that excellence was possible regardless of where you started or what obstacles you faced. They wanted inspiration. She tried to provide it without creating unrealistic expectations. After the group dispersed, Captain Frost appeared. "You handle that well," she said. "They're hungry for role models, especially the young women. Seeing someone who made it to that level means something." "I'm not comfortable being anyone's role model," Vivian admitted. "I did what I was trained to do. Nothing more." That's exactly why you're a good role model, Frost replied. You don't seek the attention. You just focus on competence and let the results speak for themselves. She paused. By the way, General Blackwell wants to see you at 1000 hours. He has something important to discuss. At the appointed time, Vivian entered the general's office to find him reviewing a thick folder. He gestured for her to sit and closed the folder before speaking. I've been contacted by JSOC headquarters, he said. They become aware of the situation here. Specifically, they're concerned about operational security now that your shadow background has been revealed publicly on a military base. Vivian felt her stomach tighten. Am I being relocated? No, the general said quickly. Actually, it's the opposite. JSOC wants to know if you would be willing to take on an expanded role. They're developing a program to better integrate retired special operations personnel into military support structures. They want someone with your background to help design the logistics and operational frameworks. Vivian absorbed that. What would that entail? You would maintain your current position, but also serve as a consultant to JSOC on logistics for classified operations. It would require periodic travel to headquarters for briefings and planning sessions. You would be working with active shadow teams among other units to optimize their supply chains and operational support. The general leaned forward. This isn't about putting you back in the field. You've earned your retirement from operations. But your expertise in both special operations and logistics is rare. JSOC believes you could significantly improve how they support their most sensitive missions. Vivian considered the offer carefully. It was more responsibility, more visibility, but it was also the chance to contribute at a strategic level to improve systems that would help operators in the field, to use everything she had learned in ways that mattered. What's the timeline for a decision? She asked. JSOC needs an answer within a week, the general said. But I want to give you advance notice so you could think about it seriously. This is a significant opportunity, but it's also a major commitment. You would be stepping back into the special operations world in a different capacity. I'll need some time to consider it, Vivian said. Of course. The general handed her a folder. This contains details about the position, including security requirements and travel expectations. Review it and let me know if you have questions. Back in her office, Vivian opened the folder and began reading. The position was exactly what the general had described. A hybrid role that leveraged both her operational experience and her logistics expertise. It would mean regular interaction with active operators, participation in mission planning at strategic levels, and influence over how special operations units were supported worldwide. It was tempting. More than tempting. It was the kind of work she had thought was behind her forever. Not operations themselves, but being part of the machinery that made operations possible. Contributing at a level where decisions affected outcomes across multiple theaters. Lieutenant Sutherland appeared at her door in the afternoon. He looked hesitant, as if unsure whether he should disturb her. Ms. Reese, may I speak with you briefly? Vivian gestured him in. What do you need, Lieutenant? Sutherland sat and took a breath. I've spent the past 36 hours doing some serious self-reflection. About my behavior, about my leadership, about the kind of officer I want to be. He met her eyes. I realized something important. I've been focused on being respected rather than being respectable. There's a difference. Go on, Vivian said. Respect based on rank or position is hollow, Sutherland continued. Real respect comes from competence and character. From making the right decisions even when they're hard. From treating people with dignity regardless of their status. You demonstrated all of that while I was too blind to see it. He paused. I'm requesting a transfer. Not because I'm running away, but because I need to rebuild myself somewhere else. Somewhere I don't carry the baggage of what happened here. I need to learn how to lead properly before I do more damage. Vivian studied him. That's a mature decision, Lieutenant. It takes courage to admit you need to start over. I wanted to tell you personally, Sutherland said, and to say again that I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, but for what I represented. The kind of officer who values appearances over substance. The kind who lets ego override judgment. I'm going to work hard to become better than that. After Sutherland left, Vivian thought about transformation. About how people could change when forced to confront their failures. about how crisis could reveal character or create it. Sutherland had a long way to go, but at least he was heading in the right direction. The afternoon brought more visitors. Staff Sergeant Morris apologized personally for his cold treatment and asked if he could buy her lunch sometime to make amends. Corporal Jensen admitted he had been following Sutherland's lead without thinking critically and promised to do better. Even Captain Brennan stopped by to acknowledge his own failures in judgment. Each apology was sincere in its own way. Each represented someone grappling with the realization that they had participated in creating a hostile environment based on ignorance. Vivian accepted them all with grace, understanding that people were imperfect and sometimes needed dramatic lessons to change their behavior. By evening, she sat alone in her office and thought about the JSOC offer. It represented a return to the world she had left. Not the same role, but adjacent to it. Close enough to feel familiar. Close enough to matter. She thought about the past 3 years. The struggle to build a civilian identity separate from her shadow past. The difficulty of finding purpose in quieter work. The isolation of carrying secrets no one around her could understand. The relief when those secrets were finally acknowledged. Maybe the quiet civilian life had always been an illusion. Maybe someone with her background couldn't truly separate from the special operations world. Maybe the best path forward was integration rather than separation, using her unique combination of skills to contribute in ways that helped others succeed. She pulled out her phone and composed a message to General Blackwell. After careful consideration, I would like to accept the JSOC consulting position. I believe I can make a meaningful contribution while continuing my work here. Please let them know I'm interested in discussing details. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The decision felt right. Not easy, but right. Sometimes the path forward meant accepting who you were rather than trying to be someone else. Sometimes it meant embracing complexity instead of seeking simplicity. The tattoo on her arm caught the light from her desk lamp. Each line still carried the same meaning it always had. Service, sacrifice, excellence. But now those lines also represented something else. Connection to a community that understood. Recognition from peers who respected capability over appearances. A bridge between the person she had been and the person she was becoming. She gathered her things and prepared to leave for the day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. The training exercise would continue. Work would need to be done. And now she would begin planning for a role that would take her back toward the world she knew best, not as an operator, but as someone who made operations possible. It was a different kind of service, but service nonetheless. And for someone like Vivian Reese, service was what mattered. Not the recognition or the status or the visibility. Just the work itself. The contribution. The knowledge that what she did made a difference. That had always been enough. That would always be enough. And now she had the chance to do it at a level that could affect outcomes across the entire special operations community. She smiled slightly as she walked out of the building into the warm evening. The quiet civilian life was over. Something more complex and challenging had taken its place. But she was ready for it. She had always been ready for whatever came next. That was what the tattoo really meant. Not just what you had done, but what you were capable of doing. Not just your past, but your future. Not just survival, but excellence in whatever form it took. Vivian Reese wore that mark with pride. She always had. She always would. And now everyone else understood why. 3 weeks later, the joint training exercise concluded with exceptional results. The after-action reviews praised the seamless logistics coordination, the precision of supply delivery, and the operational efficiency that had allowed 3 battalions to conduct complex training without a single significant disruption. Major Hendricks presented the findings at a command briefing and made certain to credit Vivian's planning and execution prominently. The atmosphere on Fort Ashford had transformed completely. Where Vivian had once walked through hostile or indifferent spaces, she now moved through an environment of respect and collaboration. Personnel greeted her in hallways. Officers sought her input on logistics challenges. The civilian staff treated her as a valued colleague rather than an outsider. The change was comprehensive and genuine. Captain Helena Frost had become something close to a friend. They met for coffee twice a week to discuss everything from operational security challenges to the difficulties of maintaining work-life balance in military environments. Frost was being considered for a position at the Defense Intelligence Agency and had asked Vivian for advice on transitioning to strategic-level work. Master Sergeant Coleman had integrated Vivian into the informal network of special operations veterans on base. She attended their monthly gatherings and found herself mentoring junior personnel who were interested in special operations careers. It was strange and satisfying to be part of a community again after years of isolation. Lieutenant Sutherland's transfer had been approved. He would be leaving Fort Ashford in 2 weeks for a position at a training command where he could focus on developing his leadership skills under experienced mentors. Before he left, he stopped by Vivian's office one final time. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," he said, "and to thank you for giving me the chance to learn from my mistakes. Not everyone would have been that gracious." "Everyone deserves the opportunity to grow," Vivian replied. "What matters is what you do with that opportunity." Sutherland extended his hand. "I won't forget the lessons I learned here. About humility, about respect, about recognizing excellence regardless of where it comes from. I'm going to be a better officer because of what happened, even though I wish I had learned it a different way." They shook hands, and Sutherland left. Vivian hoped he meant what he said. People could change, but only if they truly committed to the work. Time would tell whether Sutherland's transformation was genuine or temporary. The JSOC consulting position had been finalized. Vivian would make her first trip to headquarters the following month for initial briefings and planning sessions. She would be working with logistics specialists and operational planners to redesign supply chain frameworks for classified missions. It was exactly the kind of strategic work that used her unique combination of skills. General Blackwell had been pleased with her decision. "You're going to make a significant impact at that level," he had told her. JSOC needs people who understand both the operational and support sides, who have lived the mission tempo and know what operators need to succeed. "You're uniquely qualified." On a Friday afternoon, Vivian stood at her office window, looking out over the base. The parade grounds where she had been publicly questioned. The commissary where Sutherland had staged his confrontations. The logistics building where she had endured months of isolation. All of it looked different now, transformed by revelation and recognition. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text was brief. "Heard about your new role with JSOC. Proud of you, Shadow 6. Keep making us look good." It was signed with a call sign she hadn't heard in 3 years. One of her former teammates from Task Force Shadow, reaching out across the years of separation. She replied with equal brevity. "Still serving, just in different ways. Always forward." Captain Frost appeared at her door. "Got a minute? There's someone here who wants to meet you." Vivian turned from the window. "Who?" Frost stepped aside, and a woman in civilian clothes entered. She was mid-40s with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in demanding environments. She extended her hand. "Ms. Reese, I'm Patricia Chun. I served with Shadow from 2008 to 2015. I'm now working with the VA on programs for special operations veterans. General Blackwell thought we should connect." Vivian shook her hand, feeling the familiar recognition that came from meeting another Shadow member. The shared understanding that needed no words. "It's good to meet you." Chin smiled. "I wanted to tell you that what happened here, the way you handled it, is already making waves in the community. Other Shadow members who have transitioned out are talking about it, about how you maintain standards under pressure, about how you demonstrated what our training really means in non-operational contexts." She pulled a folder from her bag. "I'm working on a transition program specifically for Tier 1 operators, helping them find meaningful work after active duty, helping them navigate the challenges of carrying classified backgrounds into civilian life. I like your input on the program design. Your experience over these past months is exactly the kind of real-world perspective I need." "I'd be happy to help," Vivian said. They spent an hour discussing the challenges of transitioning from classified operations to conventional environments, the difficulty of explaining capabilities without revealing sources, the isolation of carrying secrets that separated you from normal social interactions, the struggle to find purpose in work that felt mundane compared to high-stakes operations. Chen understood all of it because she had lived it herself. "We need to create better pathways," she said, "better support systems, so operators don't feel like they have to hide who they are or pretend they're someone else. What happened to you here shouldn't happen to anyone." After Chen left, Vivian reflected on how far things had come in just 3 weeks. From isolation to community, from dismissal to respect, from hiding her background to being asked to help others navigate similar challenges. The transformation was remarkable, and it had started with a simple decision by General Blackwell to tell the truth. That evening, Vivian attended the change of command ceremony for one of the battalions that had participated in the training exercise. She was there in her civilian capacity, but was recognized during the ceremony when the outgoing commander thanked her specifically for the exceptional logistic support that had made the training successful. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained. Vivian accepted it with quiet grace, understanding that this was about more than just her. It was about recognizing that excellence came in many forms. That service continued long after uniforms were removed. That the people who supported operations deserved the same respect as those who conducted them. After the ceremony, young soldiers approached, asking questions about special operations careers. Vivian answered honestly about the demands and sacrifices while emphasizing that multiple paths led to meaningful service. She told them that the most important quality wasn't physical capability or tactical skill, but commitment to excellence in whatever role they chose. A young female private asked the question Vivian had been hearing frequently. How did you deal with people not believing in you, not respecting you because of how you looked or where you came from? Vivian thought carefully before answering. You focus on competence. You do the work better than anyone else can dispute. You maintain your standards regardless of external pressure. And you understand that respect earned through demonstrated capability is more valuable than respect given because of rank or status. She paused. But you also recognize when you need allies, when you need to speak up, when silence becomes complicity in your own marginalization. It's a balance. You can't fight every battle, but you can't surrender your dignity either. The private nodded, absorbing the wisdom. Thank you, ma'am. That helps. As the sun set over Fort Ashford, Vivian walked back to her car, thinking about how much had changed and how much remained the same. She was still doing logistics work, still managing supply chains, and solving operational problems. But now she did it with the full recognition of her capabilities and the respect of her peers. Now, she had the opportunity to contribute at strategic levels while mentoring others who were navigating similar paths. The tattoo on her arm caught the fading light. Each line still meant exactly what it had always meant. But now those lines also represented something more. The bridge between past and present. The connection between who she had been and who she was becoming. The proof that service took many forms and all of them mattered. She thought about the journey from that first day 8 months ago when she had arrived at Fort Ashford seeking quiet civilian work. About the months of harassment and isolation. About the crisis that had forced revelation. About the transformation that had followed. It hadn't been the path she expected, but perhaps it was the path she needed. Sometimes growth came through comfort and sometimes through challenge. Sometimes recognition came immediately, and sometimes it came late. Sometimes the quiet life you sought transformed into something louder and more complex. The key was adapting while maintaining your core principles, staying true to who you were regardless of circumstances. Vivian Reese had done that. Through everything that happened, she had maintained her standards and her integrity. She had demonstrated excellence under pressure. She had earned respect through competence rather than demanding it through status. And now she stood ready to serve again in new ways that honored both her past and her future. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment about your favorite moment or tell us if you've ever witnessed someone reveal unexpected strength. What part of Vivian's journey spoke to you most? Maybe you've seen similar situations where someone proved the doubters wrong. The tattoo would always be visible, The questions would continue. But now when people asked about those geometric lines and that small symbol, Vivian could respond with the confidence that came from being fully acknowledged. Not with details, because classification still mattered, but with the quiet certainty that she had earned every line through sacrifice and service most people would never understand. That was enough. That had always been enough. And now, finally, everyone else understood it too. She drove away from Fort Ashford as the last light faded from the sky, heading toward whatever came next with the same quiet competence that had defined her entire life. The tattoo on her arm was no longer a source of conflict, but a badge of honor properly recognized. The service it represented continued in different forms, and the woman who wore it remained exactly who she had always been. A warrior, a professional, a person who understood that true strength was often quiet until circumstances demanded otherwise. And when those circumstances arose, she was always ready, always forward, always excellent, always serving. That was what the tattoo really meant. That was who Vivian Reese really was. And that was enough.